Hello and welcome to Homicide Hobbies. I'm Andy,
And I'm Claire.
and we're here to talk about some of the disturbing things that go on in the world, past and present. We feel like not knowing doesn't mean the crazy doesn't exist.
So we're going to scar you with the knowing.
Enjoy. So, what do you got for us today, Claire?
Today, we're headed to the state where basketball was invented in 1891.
What?
Or where it's illegal to make clam chowder with tomatoes.
That's that Manhattan clam chowder.
Fine.
New York?
No. Fine. Your last hint is the state with the official dessert as Boston cream pie.
Huh. Massachusetts.
Yeah. Particularly, we're going to Reading, which has a population of roughly 20,000 people. And if you need a comparison, Boston is like 600,000. So in the scheme of things, it's a small town, even though, I wouldn't say small town, but like you get the idea of it's not a humongous area.
All right.
Fairly small town in comparison. But picture like a Gilmore Girl town where there are people, but there's also parks, trees, but not hustle and bustle of like Boston.
All right.
So I'm going to introduce you to the Gilbert family. So you're going to have mom, who's Ruth, and husband, who's Jerry, and their 4 teens. 2 boys, Jimmy and David, and 2 girls, Robin and Gail. Now, they have the house where everybody's coming and going, like the teen hangout area for during the summer.
Uh-huh.
I guess I didn't tell you the time frame we're going to.
I was just picturing the 90s. I don't know why.
You know what? I was picturing it too, and it's my case. So, and then that's when it occurred to me that it's not the 90s, and I didn't tell you a time frame, but so the 70s, but they've got the hangout. So their kids are all fairly close in age. So I think because they're close in age, they've got everybody's friends. I kind of think of you and our brother of like, friends are always over at the house because when you have close age children, they're just, the groups kind of commingle. But anyway, so it's the summer of 75 is where we're going to be chit-chatting. And that's the way the summer's been going. So we're going to fast forward to July 1st, 1975, where it's that typical summer day. The kids are enjoying the summer. The Gilbert kids are hanging around the neighborhood when 16-year-old Jimmy and his best friend David Jones are doing their thing during the day. Later in the evening, 14-year-old Robin would be watching a scary movie with her 19-year-old boyfriend Bob and her best friend Susan.
How old is she?
She's 14. I know.
All right. Sorry.
Her mom will say she was a bit cringy over Bob's age too, but he wasn't a bad kid.
He's not a kid. He's a man.
I pictured it more of like he probably was a family friend of like, it's not just some 19-year-old who popped in and eyeballed the 14-year-old, but somebody they knew. And yeah, he's a lot older than her, but in the scheme of when they're both adults, that age difference isn't as horrific. And he seemed more like, I don't know, already part of the family. So she wasn't, it wasn't a...
It's not any better.
Yeah, fine.
That would be like my second oldest son dating my oldest daughter, like one of her friends, that age group.
But I don't picture it as like actual dating. I see it as coming over to the house, watching movies, playing games. I do think it's weird for a 19-year-old because it seems like they would be doing
older things.
Right. But at the same time, I do know there are some of those where they are adults. They don't act like adults. So they're still...
It doesn't make it better.
Okay. Well, I was 4 years when you... Well, fine. Well, anyway, he is a respectable young man.
We'll argue that one.
But he's hanging out with Robin and her best friend Susan that day, and while David and Jimmy are doing their thing, but everybody's kind of in and out of the house. And eventually Bob's going to head home, and Robin and Susan are going to hang out in the basement and watch scary movies until pretty much the wee hours of the morning, and then everybody goes to bed upstairs. And then Robin's all, you want to go outside for a walk and sneak a cigarette? And Susan's like, so this scary movie gave me the heebie-jeebies, and I have zero interest in going out in the dark, let alone walking around. And not to mention, I'm pretty fucking tired, so I'm gonna just not. And she'll eventually pass out. Now, at that point, when her friends conked out, Robin's gonna sneak out of the house because her parents, her siblings, her bestie, everybody's asleep. Now, this isn't the first time Robin has snuck out and walked to a nearby golf course to sneak a cigarette. Now, the golf course was only a few blocks from her house, and lots of local kids did the same thing at this time. Only this time, Robin wouldn't return. The next morning, Susan would be woken up by Robin's dad asking where Robin is. Now, it's like 6 in the morning, and everyone starts to kind of panic as everybody's getting woken up by, where the hell's Robin? Eventually, neighbors will wake up to the panic of, hey, where's Robin? And everybody starts looking kind of frantically, trying to figure out where she could possibly be. Now, Robin's mom, she just had a real bad feeling and was like, we need to call the police. And that's what they do. A while later, Robin's dad would get a call that, good news, Robin's been found. Unfortunately, Robin won't be alive.
Oh.
One of the neighbors would find Robin's body in the tree line of the golf course, like between their property and the golf course, around 8:30 in the morning. Kind of between the corner of his property and the golf course fairway is where she's found. She's about a half a mile from her house. Her clothes were torn, her bra either cut or torn that left her breasts exposed. She had cuts on the right side of her face, near her eye, around her cheek and her jaw, and there were drag marks in the dew that showed she had been moved roughly 300 yards, then partially concealed with pine needles and leaves. Now Jerry, Robin's dad, would head home to break the news to his family. And I can't even imagine getting news of... he obviously doesn't know the extent of how she was found, but he just knows his 14-year-old little girl is dead, and he's got to break that news to the family.
That's terrible.
So he gets home and tells them that their 14-year-old Robin is no longer alive. Now, Ruth would let out a blood-curdling scream as Jerry broke down in tears, and I would imagine he was almost in denial until he had to repeat that she was dead. I imagine he drove home in a fog of
disbelief.
This feels like a real bad dream.
Yeah.
But then when he has to repeat it out loud to the people he loves and see them break down also, it tears everybody to pieces. Now, if you're like everyone else who starts wondering, what the heck happened? A 14-year-old just, doesn't turn up dead.
Disappear. Yeah.
Or disappear, or like what all happened that led her to being dead on the side of the golf course. But so is her family. And of course, someone had to have done something awful to this little girl to leave her in the state she was found. Now, Robin's body would be taken to the funeral home where an autopsy would be performed that very afternoon. At the same time, police are talking to anybody, doing the normal investigating of trying to figure out who was the last person to see her, what was she doing that day, what was a typical going on, so the usual part of an early investigation. But meanwhile, they're doing that autopsy. Now, Dr. Knowlton Bigelow is the medical examiner who would take a gander at this 14-year-old girl and determined that she had died of an undiagnosed heart problem that led to her going into sudden heart failure.
That sounds like bullshit.
He also said that her larynx bone wasn't broken and the scratches on her face were from the branches, and he didn't have any thoughts on her being dragged 300 yards. And if that leaves you blinking, that was also family and police's reaction. Also lots of what the fuck. She was also a perfectly healthy teen with no... Obviously, if he says it's an undiagnosed heart problem, nobody knew there was anything wrong with Robin. And then he's all like, well, it was in the early stages, and that's why she didn't have any outward signs. But if she would have gotten a really bad cough or like a cold or anything, it would have triggered the same problem.
He did it.
Her death is ruled natural.
No.
And you know what that does to an investigation?
Makes it stop?
Yeah. It's like all the people the police were talking to, unfortunately, it was like ended real early. They didn't have a suspect. They barely got to do anything. There's no need to collect or save anything because this isn't a homicide.
Was she dressed?
I told you that she was like partially clothed. Her bra was torn. Her shirt was torn.
That's what I thought you said, but...
I know. So everybody's...
I'm not sure if the coroner needs to have that brought back up to him, but that doesn't even make sense. Her clothes were disheveled and she magically drug herself 300 feet before...
Right. So, well, everybody's having that reaction of the blinking of... Now, Ruth, Robin's mom, is doing the whole, no, somebody did this to my daughter and there needs to be some sort of justice, like an investigation, all the things. But she's kind of at a loss because her death is not ruled a homicide. So who do you go to? The prosecution is like, this isn't a murder. They say that she died naturally. Our hands are tied. And it's just one of those, what in the literal fuck are you supposed to do if the police can't do any investigation because there is no homicide, and the medical examiner determining her death as natural shut it down, and he's basically the whole thing was disturbing. But I felt bad for the family because they have no way to seek justice on their own.
That's terrible.
But the police investigating it were also of the mind of, clearly she didn't die suddenly and then toss herself into the shrubs, so everybody's just really confused. But Robin's mom, Ruth, would lay her daughter to rest, all while believing her daughter had not died of heart failure. Now, the next few days, family and friends would come by to give their condolences, drop off food, including Jimmy's best friend David, as did Bob, Robin's boyfriend. He came by a few times just to talk to Ruth because, again, the sudden death of somebody who was important to him is just, it's hard for people to grapple with.
Yeah.
Ruth and Bob kind of just spend time talking about how much they miss her and just they don't understand what happened and how this is just not being investigated. After a lot of talking, the family felt they had no other choice but to accept that Robin died of heart failure and it was a freak kind of thing. That they weren't going to get answers to all the questions that they had, and they had to go on because they can't live life this way. Now, again, there's no investigation because her death is ruled as natural. A few months would go by, and Robin's sister would come home to find David, Jimmy's friend, in the house. There'd be like a weird struggle because it's just like, I don't know what the situation was because it was weird even seeing it or reading about it, not seeing it. I wasn't there. But there'd be a weird struggle. I guess he was snooping around the house or doing something in the house when she came in. And I guess when he got startled, he ends up conking her over the head and running away.
Oh.
And again, no idea why he was there. I don't know if it was a panty raid or what. But he gets the usual slap on the wrist. Nothing major is after that. I can't imagine he was invited over to the house ever again. But it was just a weird thing that happened. Now, the days would tread on, and eventually life would start to get back to some sort of normal, as most of normal you could get, and that horrific day would start to fade into a really bad memory. Robin's friend Susan would carry the guilt with her of not going with her friend that night, and the cruel game of what-ifing all of the things she could have done, and maybe it would have changed. I don't know if it would have resulted in 2 people being dead.
I don't know, but that's terrible. I couldn't imagine.
Dude, when I say, I know we've done crazy cases of the 70s and 80s and really the 60s of like, of what the fuck? But this one got me because I don't even understand, like, one, how the medical examiner can say it was natural causes, and then 2, why nobody bothered to be like, yeah, maybe we get a second opinion. But from what I gather, it's not, like, when you're the lower ranking, you shouldn't question people above you. And the medical examiner position is apparently next to God. So if they say that, that's what goes, is what this felt like.
It's disturbing.
We're going to fast forward more than 2 decades later. A tip would come into the police station. Jerry would get an out-of-the-blue phone call from the Reading Police Department from Kevin Patterson about having new information on Robin's death. They now had reason to believe her death was not natural and had in fact been a homicide.
Oh my gosh.
So with a tip to check out the case and a new set of eyes looking into this tragic day, the 2 investigators assigned to it are Mark Delaney and Kevin Patterson, who would read through the autopsy and look at the very few pictures they had, because again, that investigation came to a sudden halt almost as quickly as it began, so there's really not a whole lot. They'd also read through a few brief when they did talk to people, and these 2 detectives could not piece together between how she was found and how they managed to rule it was natural, because one of the biggest things to Mark and Kevin was the fact that Robin had been concealed, clearly dragged, and her clothes torn.
Right. So now we have somebody that actually wants to solve the case looking at it.
Right. 20 years later.
Ugh.
Now, it turns out that her being partially buried under debris wasn't missed by the original officers. It also wasn't missed that she had been dragged, but when the medical examiner came back that afternoon saying she died naturally because of whatever undiagnosed heart problem caused the thing to close, and at no point anyone challenged the medical examiner's decision, and that they had interviewed a few people, but ultimately didn't come up with a suspect before that case closed. Now, unfortunately, again, the medical examiner and the supervisor are both deceased.
Oh my gosh.
So these new detectives don't even have the benefit of being able to go over and just ask, like, so what exactly was going through your head when you both decided that this was a natural death, or like just to get some sort of perspective of what occurred that they're not seeing. Now, since they're both dead, they go to Robin's parents, and with their blessing, they exhume Robin's body 22 years after she was laid to rest.
That's terrible.
And I'm sure her parents were just so excited to, fuck, 22 years later. I mean, finally. I feel so bad for them because it was a huge injustice, the fact that this laid just like, ugh. Anyway, they exhume her body, and fortunately, the formaldehyde had done a fantastic job preserving her, and for the most part, she was preserved really well. More importantly, her heart. And the new examiner couldn't see any sign of heart disease that they originally said they saw,
Oh, that's disgusting.
or any other rare disease that could have caused her sudden death. And this medical examiner would determine that even though she didn't have like her hyoid bone or the larynx or any of that broken, that he did determine she died from strangulation. And now the bigger question, who done it? The police would have a lead. I bet you're wondering what that tip was that kicked off this whole investigation.
A little bit, yeah.
It was the dying words of Marjorie Jones, David Jones's mother, in 1996. As she laid waiting on her deathbed from being plagued with cancer, she would tell her sister that she was pretty sure her son David had killed Robin. The night she went missing, she had caught David coming in late and acting weird, and prior to that, she had seen Robin and David holding hands.
Wait,
And it turns out
I thought she was dating the other dude.
she was.
Oh.
Yeah. So it was just like, I feel like the mom was just like kind of looked over and maybe they were coming out of the woods holding hands or doing whatever. I don't know. But the mom was just like, that's weird. And she turns out she had also wrote down that incident in her journal when it happened, because it's just like, obviously that's an important part of your life. If the neighborhood kid is found dead and your boy was holding hands, and then the whole thing is weird, but she hadn't said anything, and it's just been eating at her for this whole time, and nobody wants to think their kid could do that. Then, when she finds out Robin was missing the following morning, she had suspicion, but there wasn't anything other than that. So she's going to pass away, and her sister's going to call the police department and just let them know her dying sister's suspicions, and that's what kicks everything off, because they take tips like that super serious, and then when you figure a detective takes a peek at it and they're like, how the fuck is this not a murder?
Well, and then her journal entry, because it was made years ago,
Yeah,
that'll be evidence.
it was, because it places him as he was clearly out along the same time Robin was out.
Hmm.
Now, the next question, where the hell's David? They track him down to living in a trailer park in Georgia with his second wife and her 4 kids. Now, he had gotten married to someone in the Boston area when he was real young, but that relationship fizzled out as quickly as it mustered up, and he would move with his adoptive parents to the Atlanta area in the 80s. And then he would start working in several different restaurants, kind of bouncing around, just working as a short order cook. Now, he would have arrests that include possession of marijuana, driving under the influence, failing to pay child support, escaping from custody, and simple battery.
Oh.
Now, the battery charge was from him smacking around his second wife, but that is just his arrests in that one county. It would rack up to being a total of 13 times he's in and out of jail. And I realize that's not a lot in comparison to some of the people we've done, but it's just, he's got some issues.
Yeah. Like the fact that he murdered a little girl and got away with it. It's probably chewing a hole in his brain.
Well, now of those 13 times he'd been arrested, he usually was only in jail a few days or weeks, nothing extensive.
Of course.
Now, not only those 13 arrests, but 2 years after Robin died, David was arrested for sexually assaulting a woman on the street, and he got 8 months in prison before he was paroled.
Ew.
Right? So the detectives are like, considering his dying mom thought he had something to do with it, his record there is making it seem like, this is most likely our feller. He's got not the best track record. So they go down to Atlanta because they just want to talk to him. And at first, David would say he couldn't really recall a whole lot about that day. And my bullshit meter went off, because that would have to be a huge impact on your life. And you would think that you could recall a whole lot, just like everybody else they'll talk to, of they remember it like it was yesterday because it had such an impact, of that was somebody they cared about. So you would think for somebody's house who you were at almost every day, you'd be able to recall such a monumental chunk of your summer that year. So initially he'd just be like, I don't really remember anything. Then after a few hours of chit-chatting, David would admit that he was with Robin at the golf course that night. But that was a thing that him and Robin did. They'd meet up late at night and chit-chat at the golf course, do some making out, smoking cigarettes, and just kind of shoot the shit. Now, they would decide that, David's our guy. He admits to being at the golf course, and considering all the other things, they proceed to charge David with her murder and arrest him and bring him to Massachusetts to stand trial for first-degree murder in 1997. But guess what? Even though he's a full-fledged adult now, his attorney wants to keep it in juvenile court.
Oh.
It would take 6 long, excruciating years the prosecution wants to try him in adult court since he's an adult. His defense attorney wants to keep it in juvenile court because he was a juvenile, back and forth. 6 years of that. And then in October 2004, now 30 years after Robin's death, her murderer would finally be held accountable. He would be tried in adult court, and it would be a 10-day-long trial. The prosecution believed that Robin and David had indeed met up at the golf course like they'd done before and were doing their making out, but at some point, they assume it turned to David wanting probably to have sex, and she didn't because she's not that kind of girl. But that's when a struggle occurred and ended with David placing his hands around Robin's neck and choking the life from her. Unfortunately, the prosecution had their work cut out for them because they had to prove the original cause of death was wrong, then prove that David did kill her. And mind you, they don't have any actual evidence. But they did have that David said he was there with her, and he was the last person to see her alive. And not only that, he was at the crime scene.
Oh.
Now, they would have person after person testify who knew Robin, and Jimmy would testify because he also knew David, and, his sister was the one that died. The jury would not hear from David's aunt because that kicked off the whole hearsay thing, since she only heard what her dying sister said. However, the diary was entered into evidence. Now, David's attorney would try to paint the then 16-year-old David as a good kid, like a typical all-American kid, and it could have been Robin's boyfriend Bob, who was so much older than her, and maybe he found out she was sneaking off to the golf course with another kid and got mad and murdered her. And after all, David admitted to being with her, but never admitted to killing her. No matter how hard, though, the defense would try, Bob was never implicated in Robin's murder. And I think the biggest thing was David's mother said he came in late.
Yeah, that's pretty damning.
Yeah. Well, and your own mother.
Yeah.
Now, the jury would be shown the tape of David talking to detectives, and there was a bit of an issue because the detectives went down to Georgia, and now they would say they used tools, and they never lied to him, but when they interview him, they put, clothes that looked like what Robin was wearing into evidence bags, and would talk about DNA and placing things, and that's what makes David say he was there, they were making out, because they're just talking about evidence and DNA. But the officers are all like, we never said we had DNA for Robin's case. We're just talking about DNA, that everything has come up so quick, and it's possible to see all these things. And that's what makes David confess to being there, and what would explain his DNA being on her clothes. But he never admits to murdering her. But it's like that fuzzy gray area of they don't have any of that. Because it wasn't ruled a homicide, there would be no evidence at that point to have been collected and saved. But they were just like, again, they never said the things that they came in with were Robin's things or the evidence, but that they were just using a bluff when they took out that fake folder of evidence and yapped about DNA until he did admit that he was with her. Now, the jury would take all of that with him and deliberate over 5 days and come back with a guilty verdict. However, they didn't think he was guilty of first-degree murder. They found him guilty of voluntary manslaughter, and he would be sentenced to up to 20 years in prison, and the 6 years he waited to go to trial would count towards that. Now, mind you, he's married, but his wife would beat feet and not respond to any interviewers' requests.
Good for her.
Now, again, that like all of Robin's siblings are older and they were all interviewed because they remember that clearly, mainly because a lot of them said they never saw their dad cry until that day. And it's just like to watch him break down the way he did. I mean, they're never going to forget that. So it's just, I think for sure he did it. I hope he rots in jail. Disgusting. It's amazing he didn't have any other victims. I know the one lady he sexually assaulted, but I feel so bad for her family that they had to wait as long as they did. Because if it would have been investigated in any sort, I think even talking to him at that point, he probably would have set off alarms if anyone got to him before the case was shut down.
The only, and this is a far stretch, the only semi, I guess, would be her boyfriend. If he would have found out when she first died that she was fooling around with somebody else, that probably would have crushed him even more. But having it been so many years,
Yeah.
I guess he's most likely moved on with his life, and so it was a little bit easier to hear that versus when he was young. And her family itself, that sucks. At least her parents were alive to hear the end of it.
So that was my little trying to find a silver lining to this, was that they hadn't passed. But it's just like, I can't even imagine how hard that was to continue on your life, because I would still think that, somebody murdered my daughter, and then how am I supposed to go along pretending life is okay? You have to have like a fear for your other children.
Yeah.
Because it's like potentially somebody is in your neighborhood that's not a huge neighborhood and murdered one kid. Or even if, let's pretend that they're going to take the medical examiner's word that she has an undiagnosed heart problem, then fucking look at the rest of my kids, because if a cold could have killed them, that I would assume that's some sort of genetic issue.
Yeah, that sounded like hogwash, though.
But it was terrifying to read of like, yeah, okay. It's also a shame the medical examiner and the supervisor were dead by the time somebody decided to give this case an actual look-see, because it'd be nice to hear what they would say back to. So you thought she died of natural causes and dragged herself into the shrubbery?
And tore her clothes?
Yeah. And then the scratches to her face were from the branches. Right.
It doesn't even make any sense.
It doesn't make any sense. So it's just like, all right. And the fact that people who were first on the scene notated in there, and even apparently the pictures, you could see the dew in the grass of how far she had been dragged.
That's so sad.
But I also kind of curious, like David's mom, if you thought your kid killed another kid, I wouldn't.
And she kept her mouth shut forever? Yeah.
Yeah, I'd be like locking that door, setting booby traps of like, because I don't know if was one of the, like, I would assume he wasn't a scary kid, otherwise I don't know, but I would think that it'd be scary to live in a house with somebody who you wouldn't be sure if they knew that you were onto them, if they would try to murder you in response.
Yeah.
I think I've watched too many movies.
I think so too.
Well, it just seems crazy to think that, like, how do you sleep at night if you think somebody in your house murdered someone else and you just don't address it?
I don't know if that makes her a good mom or a terrible one. She's definitely a terrible friend to that family.
Well, I kind of assumed that she couldn't have been that close to the parents, and it was just like kids that went and hung out, or like just since they're all tearing around the neighborhood kind of free willy-nilly, that they couldn't have, because if she would have known Robin or Robin's family, I don't know how you could look somebody in the eye. But then I guess at the same time, if she's wrong and points the finger at her own kid, then she also feels like a piece of shit, because
That's why they're called anonymous tips.
yeah. But it's disgusting to think if she wouldn't have said anything, there still wouldn't have been any justice, if you can consider this justice at this point. And I do believe that it probably turned to like a makeout session, that he was a horny teen and she's still 14, of like, she's not ready to go there.
How old was he when he killed her?
16.
Babies having sex.
Yeah. But your lesson for today would be, if you've got a gut feeling, go with your gut. And it's not on you if somebody in your circle does a real bad thing, but it is on you if you decide to not say anything and
keep your trap shut.
Yeah, it's disgusting.
It is. I have something to say and I can't say it.
You can say it.
She's fucking around with older dudes. She's sneaking out. When does that ever end well?
Yeah. Well, she wasn't sneaking out with Bob.
It doesn't matter. She's
So,
cheating on her boyfriend. Like, come on now, you're 14. You got a 19-year-old guy and a 16-year-old guy you're fucking with?
yeah, well, I don't think she was fucking with him. So I kind of pictured it as like whenever anybody does the whole old dating thing in high school and it's not really dating.
I don't know. The fact that they're
Of like you just do the hold hands and watch movies and you're not really.
I don't know.
I also, when I read it and was like 19-year-old boyfriend, I was like, ooh, that would be real shitty if he did see her at the golf course and did some murdering. But I figured it was probably one of those things of obviously he's driving, but like he never left his house where David was seen coming back late and admitted to being there, where they couldn't place Bob in the vicinity. And Bob doesn't have a criminal record.
Yeah.
Where you figure not only was David in the house a couple months after Robin's death, but assaulted Robin's sister. That doesn't look good. And then 2 years after that, he's arrested for sexually assaulting a woman on the street.
Those are all his mother's fault. All of that.
Yeah.
Because if she would have said something, it's disgusting.
Yep. But angry teens are scary teens.
They really are. I have an angry teen case coming up.
I forget what we were talking about the other week when it reminded me of this case. I don't know why I just said that because it absolutely has like no substance to like having. I forget what I mentioned that reminded me of this. There's a whole lot of air. Naturally, I'd recap it again. Still didn't jog any memory.
I have no idea what you're even talking about, so it
Me
didn't
neither.
jog it for me either. Maybe when my daughter
I
was
think it
walking around
was-
mad.
I think it was the cause of death thing.
What?
Not your daughter. But no, I think it was, we were talking about something of like the cause of death being wrong. And I didn't want to give it away, my case, but I don't remember, Andrea.
Oh, you know what it might have been? Also, it could have been when I told you that my daughter, when I was taking them to that kid's birthday party, and I found out that he was in high school, and I was like, what?
Maybe.
Because the older boy.
Yeah, I guess because your kids being close in age, they kind of in the same circles.
Yeah, this case made me think of them a lot.
Well, I also thought of us growing up and how our brother's friends were hanging out. So that's where I figured if it was like if I snuck out and was hanging out with one of them, because I will say there was one of our brother's friends that I would chit chat with. And shoot, you figure your friend's boyfriend, I snuck out to go see him.
Yeah.
And he was very much an adult. And I was very much not an adult.
Yeah, I heard about that. It was not good.
So I kind of related to this one in the sense of...
You were a naughty girl.
And Dad, like there was one time we went to the movies and he came to pick me up. Now Dad did like an eye raised thing over his reading glasses, but it was also like I think Dad had seen him before. So it was also like it's not an unfamiliar kid.
Yeah. Well, you figure he was 2 years older than me.
That's why I see.
And I'm 4 years older than you.
I was probably 15, 16, and he was very much an adult.
Yeah.
So that's where my brain was going of if you're the younger sibling and you're also hanging around the older kids, you kind of, I don't want to say you grow up faster, but you end up having those conversations and memories and things to chit chat. That could be why you can't relate though, because you were the older sibling.
Well, no, because I hung out with our brother's older friend. Well, they were the same age.
Yeah, you guys were closer in age,
Yeah.
but where me and you hung out,
Well,
I was 3 years behind, which I remember one of them being just like, I don't want to say
which one?
the one you had dated, which you ruined that for me.
What is wrong with you? Find your own, man.
But I remember it being like, you're too young, and be just being like all mopey, and then you had to go see a movie with him.
We dated for like 6 months.
Yeah, well, you broke my heart.
And our brother was pissed.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I really can't identify with that. But you know what? I think it's got to be like a certain age gap because I don't think our youngest sister.
No, that's because she was in elementary school. She was still being a titty baby.
Yeah. The age gap between you and her is the same as you and me.
Well, so it made it harder because, like, I was in high school. I mean, even though, like, freshman-wise. But I was in high school. She was in middle school. So it made it, like, we didn't have the same circle of friends. And I was also, I don't know if you remember this one, but the district lines were being changed.
Redone, yeah. When they changed our school from a middle school, high school, that I would have had a problem with as an adult because, dude, the middle schoolers end up hanging out with high schoolers, which is how I got to know some of the people I got to know, which is how you got to know some of the people you knew.
Right. Well, that's where I was saying this case made me think of that one, and that's why a 14-year-old dating a 19-year-old didn't seem wildly shocking to me, especially if you've got the hangout house, because I very much think that's what our house was growing up with you and our brother and their friends.
Hey, do you remember the prank war?
I do remember it, because that's when that one feller sat on your Felix the cat clock.
Yeah, which I don't even understand why that was off the wall.
Oh, because they were stealing things.
Yeah, but he set it on my bed and then sat on it.
Like, I don't know. Like, I remember there being shaving cream. I remember things happening in his room, things happening in your room, and being the go-between.
We destroyed the house too.
Yeah.
It was a mess. We videotaped that though, and I'm curious whatever happened to that tape.
I would be willing to bet it's in the VHS collection at Dad's. You'd have to ask our brother.
So thrown out.
I don't know. It could also, you could ask our youngest sister, because that was her camera. I don't know why she was gifted a video camera, by the way.
It wasn't hers. Like, it might have been given to her eventually, but the one that we used,
Yeah.
dude, nuh-uh, because I was in 9th grade. There's no way that was hers.
No, you were not.
When we did the prank war, I was in 9th grade.
Fine.
Because that was when I first started running cross country, and that was our cross country group that was all over.
So you're way younger than I'm remembering. Just so we're clear, it came afterwards.
What?
When I was in high school.
Oh. You're lucky to be alive. You know that, ma'am? Because you were a bad girl.
Dad knew where I was.
No, he did not.
I went to go see a movie with that fella. We just didn't actually go in to see the movie.
You were a bad kid. I remember when they found wine coolers in your room. They thought I bought those for you.
Dude, that wasn't me.
It was your friend, but it was still
I know,
your room.
But I didn't like wine coolers. And you can't pretend you were all innocent. You're the one who found the Crown Royal in the bottom of the pantry.
No. You can't.
I can. Because you were like, you got to try this. And I was like, that's awful. It still is, by the way. But
first of all, hold on. You can't combine different stories. These are way different events. The Crown Royal. No.
You're making it. You just said I was a bad kid.
So I was still living at the house when we found the Crown Royal, and I can't help it if I was curious. I had never tried it before, and it wasn't you gotta try this. It was both of us together decided to try it, and it was disgusting. I didn't think Crown Royal could go bad, but I'm pretty sure that went bad. The wine coolers, I wasn't living at home anymore. I had already moved out.
Yeah, but those weren't mine. Legitimately, they weren't mine.
I know, but I'm just saying I got blamed for that shit.
So that was when I stopped hanging out with that particular gal as well, because she would end up coming to school high and then do like the whole eye drop thing so her eyeballs weren't all bloodshot. And then she'd also put vodka in her water bottle. Like, it was just one of those, I wasn't doing that.
Yeah. I just remember being in a lot of trouble. That was one of the things that got brought up when our parents finally got divorced in court, was that I contributed to the delinquency of you.
You did? You poured my glass.
I did not. We took a swig right out of the Crown Royal, and we were again. That was when we both lived at the house. Well, thanks for that. Memory lane and the case. So lots.
Good luck editing all this, by the way, because we can't have a case that prattles on down memory lane as long as my case.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode of Homicide Hobbies. If we made you laugh, if we made you cry, or if we mind-fucked you for the day, then we thank you for listening. Please write a review on whatever you're listening to us on. Tell your friends, tell your family, tell your coworkers. We're freaking awesome. And join us next week for another episode of Homicide Hobbies. I'm Andy.
And I'm Claire.
That's all we've got.